Well, boy, we can talk a lot about this, about moving system audio and everything around. It's the bane of my
Yeah.
existence right now.
Well, dude, I upgraded to an iMac Pro about a year ago, and then I got audio hijack and everything, so I'm just routing, using virtual instruments and routing stuff all over the place on my Mac, and it actually works.
Well, we should roll so we can talk about this.
Yeah. Well, we are rolling, so
Oh, okay.
we'll put this in. So let's go. I'll do an abbreviated intro, Bobby.
Yeah.
Ready? Just grunt.
Yeah.
Ah!
Yeah.
Oh man, my headphones are loud. Oh my, that's right. Abbreviated intro time because we have a world-class guest. Welcome to the Podcast Engineering Show. My name's Chris Curran. I produce podcasts for a bunch of big companies, a bunch of medium companies, and every week on this show, we bring you podcast production techniques on a silver platter. We really talk shop with podcast producers, engineers, and other specialists. And I have a background in audio engineering in the music business. And, anyway, this is an abbreviated intro. So if you implement the best of what you learn here, your podcast will sound a lot better, and you'll spend less time producing them. And, of course, I got to fade the music real quick. Hold on. Of course, Barry is here with me.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Barry. Bobby, Barry is the old maintenance guy in my old building, and I actually got him to sit down and talk, and I recorded his voice and stuff. And that's actually his voice.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Anyway, Podcast Engineering School starts in January, and we do a semester every quarter. So check that out, podcastengineeringschool.com. Today, Bobby Owsinski is here. Wait a minute. Wait, here it is. Yes, Bobby Owsinski's here today. Oh, jeez. They love you, Bobby.
What a crowd.
I just faded him out quick, though. So unnatural. Bobby, you're an audio engineer. You know that. I'm telling everybody else. Audio engineer, producer, author, and coach. You have 24 books on recording engineering, mixing, all things audio. And we were just talking before we started rolling. The recording is that I had your Mixing Engineer's Handbook in probably 99 or 2000. That's when I was back from New York and I was going into some of the smaller studios, and that was pretty cool. You have mixed the #2 album on the Billboard Blues charts. You've authored several courses for Berklee College of Music. You have a blog. You worked on surround sound projects and DVD projects with some huge names, including Iron Maiden, dude.
Yeah, all right. Bang your head against the wall.
Yes. So, Bobby Owsinski, welcome to the Podcast Engineering Show, man.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, I'm really happy you can hang. I think you're the first audio engineer of your stature to come on my show, so I'm really excited to have you. All the people who listen to the show are pretty much into podcasting and producing podcasts. That's why they listen, because they're either recording and producing their own shows, or a lot of podcast editors listen to this show, so they're getting audio files from a client and they got to put it together and make it sound good and all that. So we're excited to hear from you. We have a lot to talk about. Normally we do a speed round, Bobby. When I ask the guest what is their equipment setup, we start with the mic, and then where the mic is plugged in and what audio interface they're using, and we just go through their whole signal chain all the way through to the software, and then what they mix podcasts on. So anyway, I know you don't really do podcasting, but take us through your signal chain with the equipment going through the signal chain.
Well, I do podcasting. I have Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, and actually we've done 228 episodes.
Okay. So, let's hear it for Chris for his show prep.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
So
sorry about that, Bobby.
I do a podcast every week, so I'm quite familiar with all this, actually. And my setup is strictly for the podcast. So
cool.
I start with a Shure SM7B for microphone. It goes into a Neve 1073 clone. I used to have that go into an 1176 compressor limiter clone, but I've recently taken that out of the circuit because it was just a little too noisy for me. And then it goes into a UAD Universal Audio Apollo Twin MKII. Goes into the line input and then into my computer. And like I was telling you before, right now it's a 2013 iMac, but very soon it will be a brandy new iMac. Mm. And then the whole thing is moving things around, getting the audio to talk to all sorts of different places and things inside the computer, which is not easy, and it's something that I've struggled with for a long time. And right now I'm using, I was just going to say the wrong thing. I'm using Soundflower. After trying all sorts of other utilities, Soundflower just seems to be the one that works for me. And frankly, I have to say, as an audio engineer who's done this a lot and written books on the subject and everything, sometimes the way these apps are presented, I can't get my arms around. They're made for people who are beginners, but to such a degree that it's like I can't understand the routing many times. So I don't know if you've run into that yourself, but I look at this stuff and I go, wait a second, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's happened to me.
I'm expecting one thing and another thing happens. So anyway, at some point in time, I will move away from SoundCloud and into something else. I'm sure there's another solution out there that will work better.
Yeah, I was just mentioning before we kicked it off that about there's a company called Rogue Amoeba, and they make a program called Audio Hijack, and it's for Mac only. And it just captures audio from any device, any virtual device. And then that Rogue Amoeba also makes this program called Loopback, where you actually can create virtual instruments. So you can do like sub mixes and send, Q mixes and what mix minuses is what they call them in podcasting. It's just really great software. It's not even that expensive, but it's definitely the Rogue Amoeba Audio Hijack and Loopback is, I'm pretty sure it's a good step up from Soundflower. But I've never used Soundflower, but if you're using it, obviously it's good.
I've used Loopback, where I've tried to use it, and for some reason I just couldn't get it to work the way I wanted it to. That being said, I understand there's a brand new version of it, and I'm going to try that soon and see if that works better.
Yeah, I did actually a bonus video for my students about Audio Hijack and Loopback, because it is like, it's kind of like you can route anything anywhere, and so it's a little confusing. So I just set up virtual instruments. For instance, like if I'm connecting with someone on Skype and I need to send them audio of my voice, obviously, and maybe I need to send them the audio from my audio sample player, right? Like my intro music. Then I need to send them, maybe if I'm gonna play part of a YouTube video through, let's say, Google Chrome, I need to send them that. So you just set it up in Loopback. I name the virtual instrument to Skype, because that's what I'm gonna send to Skype. And then in that virtual instrument, which I call to Skype, you just put my audio source, my theme music audio source, and Google Chrome as a source. And then boom, all those three things just go to Skype. And then in Skype, you have to open up Skype and get the input control, and you have to choose as the input for Skype that virtual instrument to Skype. And that's it. And then of course you can get all even more confusing and nutty with it, but works really good.
Well, I'm going to have to try that. I don't know. I do use Skype most of the time, although I think I'm going to change to Source Connect. Actually, Source Connect now. And I was actually on a podcast 2 or 3 weeks ago, and one of the people that was the principal of the podcast, there's 3 of them or 4 of them, one of the hosts was one of the creators of Source Connect. Oh. And if you're not familiar with Source Connect, that sort of replaced ISDN for people that were doing long distance, and I mean country to country voiceovers and ADR. And it is crystal clear. It's also free. Source Connect now is free. They have 5 or 6 or 7 other products that you pay for, but they're more applicable to really high-end movie or radio commercials or whatever, that sort of application.
Right.
But the sound was wonderful, I have to say, and it really beat the crap out of Skype.
Yeah. I actually use Source Connect now when I probably around 5 years ago when I first, about 6 years ago when I first got into podcasting, and it was really good. But back then it was like you could only record I don't even know what it was, 15 minutes of audio at a time. Like that was the max recording, and it was like, really, that didn't make sense. So, but now I know they've upgraded, and I've talked to the guys over there, and I even saw them at NAB, or I talked to them before NAB. I didn't actually get to go visit them, but they were at NAB. Source Connect is awesome, and Source Connect now, I haven't tried it since then. These days I'm using Zencaster, that's how we're connected right now, which is pretty good. When it doesn't have a meltdown, which is rare, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it sounds good. Sounds good. I must admit, I've been okay for the most part with Skype. And where Skype comes in handy is a lot of times when I do a podcast, people just refuse to go on their computer and they want to do it by phone.
Oh.
So it's really easy for me to connect via Skype.
Yeah.
And, again, the only reason why I do that is so I can record it into Pro Tools at the same time. Now, that being said, it also means that there's going to be quite a lot of post-production. But in general, there's a fair amount. For me, I would say there's about an hour to an hour and a half for each program that I do. The programs go between 40 minutes and an hour. There's no set time. Plus another 10 minutes. 40 minutes for the guest interview, and another 10 minutes of me talking about the topics of the day. So usually that sounds pretty good because I'm on this same signal path here. But that being said, I've had to use some extreme measures, as I'm sure you have, on guests. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to know some of the things you've done to overcome that, because specifically with Skype, I think maybe the sample rate might be around something like 16 kilohertz or even 14 or 12 kilohertz, because, a lot of times when I open it up and I look at the frequencies that it captured, it doesn't capture anything above like 8K or 10K. And that's wow, that just makes the whole thing sound pretty dull.
Well, I get around that. Well, first of all, I don't have it open in front of me, but I can pretty much remember what I use is almost standard. I have an EQ curve that seems to work really well that I apply as a preset in Fabfilter. And there's 2 of them. There's one for normal Skype, and there's another one for phone over Skype. This is for the guest, not for me.
Right.
And then there's a compressor, also a Fabfilter C2. Actually, it's the compressor first and the EQ. Then I almost always need some sort of de-essing. And I use a Waves F6, and that's a dynamic EQ. And it's the best thing I've found because it's the most variable in terms of the parameters available. Sometimes I'll use as many as 4 different bands, which, you don't find that on any de-esser, really. I mean, you're lucky if you get 2 channels,
right?
Really. But in this case, there's 4, and they're quite variable, and there's also an RTA that's built in, so you can see exactly what's going on. So I find that very helpful. And then usually at the end, there's a Mog Audio, EQ4, I guess. And that has the famous airband on it. And the airband actually gives it the top end and the air that's missing. It was designed for, situations like that, but not exactly, but it's designed to add that stuff up there, and it really does a good job. And also, if there's anything missing on the bottom, it adds that too. So it's a nice finishing touch. And then a lot of times, I was telling you this before we started, I have trouble with people that should know better that seem to want to record their end in a really, really reflective, boingy room. So many times they'll have to clean that up, usually with Ozone, the latest version, I guess it's R6, and that's de-reverb that I'll use, which does a nice job. It does, it's not perfect, but it's better than having the reflective sound. So that ends up being the signal path. On my master bus, I've been using the latest Fabfilter, I guess it's the L2. And what's good about that is it also has a series of meters in it, and one of them is a LUFS meter. So I make sure that I'm always around minus 16 LUFS. So that means that everything is fairly consistent from program to program.
And the Fabfilter L2, that's on your master bus, you said, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the de-reverb, that was using, is that Isotope RX6?
Yeah. Yeah, it's RX6. And it works great. I have to say, I don't really have to play with it too much. It just goes across the guest track.
Right.
Now, that being said, I do edit quite a lot. And what I'll do is I'll edit mostly for continuity, but also I want things to go quickly because I know what it's like when I listen to a podcast. And if there's lots of ums and ands and things like that, it makes me crazy. Also, if there's lots of dead air. So right. I try to get rid of all that within the realm of reason. Obviously, if it changes the flow of things, or if it changes the meaning, or if it changes how, a guest is coming across, I won't do it that severely. But I'm not afraid to go in and do it. I do it a lot for myself. Probably I edit myself a lot more than I do the guest, because I tend to be one of those people, as you'll hear here. There'll be big lags in between, thoughts. And although I think I get to the right place, sometimes it takes some time. So I make sure that everything flows, pretty quickly when it comes to my podcast.
Yeah, that is so important. And so some people don't do that, and then it just lags and it's almost unlistenable, like you said. And also on the other end of the spectrum, there are, I'm reminded of a show I listened to, it's a pretty popular show, where it was edited so tight and you couldn't hear any breaths. They took out all the breaths and tightened everything up so much that it was so unnatural. It was also unlistenable.
Yeah, right. Now, I should say that, the way I get into podcasting was kind of unique. I was originally part of I'm pretty sure this is the case. It's the oldest audio-related podcast around. It's called the Audio Nowcast. It's been going on for almost 12 years now. And it's a round table. There's usually at least 4, maybe 5 people, and they're all from different audio genres in Los Angeles. So there's one guy that just mixes television commercials. There's another guy that's a big A-list sound designer for movies. There's another guy that's been Stevie Wonder's right-hand guy for 30 years. There's another guy that's a composer, and various people that come in and out, some fairly big audio engineers. I came on as a guest in episode 92, and this was like 6 or 7 years ago. And they asked me to stay on as a permanent guest, a permanent host. So I think it's up to about 180 now or 190. It doesn't happen as frequently as everybody would like. But that being said, somewhere along the line, I was contacted by a listener who said, you should have your own podcast. I said, I just don't have the time for that. I don't want to add another thing on my plate. And he says, look, I teach people how to do this. If you just record it, I'll do all the posts. I'll put it all together. And that's what we did. Steve Cherubino is his name.
Oh, I know Steve.
You know Steve? Yeah. So Steve did the first 90 some episodes, and then he got too busy. So then I took over the post after that. And it actually worked out for the better because Steve is really good at what he does. He's not an audio engineer, and he couldn't bring the level of expertise that I bring to it. And just I have to say, more in the details of some of the things we're talking about. Oh, the one thing I missed on all the channels that I do, I also have a noise gate in every channel. So it takes any noise, especially any Skype noise, away. But it's a gentle gate in that it only, it doesn't shut everything off. It only decreases the level by 15 dB or something. Anyway, it's things like that he wasn't doing, or, I wouldn't expect him to be aware of.
Right.
Because, what I bring is a next level expertise than most people would have. So as a result, my podcast sounded a lot better. And then it's funny because about 20 episodes later, he came back and said, I have more time now. And I said, you know what? I think I'm going to keep it going the way it is now because I'm, more happy with it, despite the fact that I have to spend more time. Right. So that's the way it's been going since then, probably for the last 2 years. That's like I said, we're up to, I think I've recorded 240, although there's probably 218 or 20, I think, that are out there. I don't even remember the number. I know it's in the mid 200s that we've done so far.
So what, you've recorded a bunch that you haven't published yet?
Yeah.
Or you will never publish them?
No. We're about 2 months ahead.
Okay.
And the reason why, sometimes it doesn't work like that. Sometimes it's a last minute thing where, it's a Friday. I publish every Tuesday morning, 6 a.m., drop dead, it's going to post. And there are some days that it goes right down to the wire. Not many, but I've had it happen where I just couldn't get a guest or whatever. But I find my guests come in bunches for whatever reason.
Right.
And in this case, I must have had 10 people within 2 weeks.
Wow.
So, I'm way ahead. And really good guests too, a wide variety of guests, but some real heavy hitters. So it's been fun. It's a lot of work, but on the other hand, now we don't have to worry about it for a while, except for the post.
That's good. That's a good feeling to be ahead for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So I have a lot of questions. I have tons of questions, but let's go. I want to just step through your mic and your signal chain just a little more. So the Shure SM7B, I just looked up a picture of it.
I'm sorry, I'm completely wrong. It's a 7B. I don't know what I'm thinking. 5A. Geez.
Okay.
A 5A is a really old microphone.
Right.
No,
it looks kind of cool. I was like, all right, cool. So the Shure SM7B. Okay, that's good. And then let's talk about the 1073 clone.
Well, wait a second. Let me talk about the microphone first. I have a pretty good collection of microphones, all sorts of different new ones and old ones and clones of old ones and a variety. And from time to time, I put them all up and I go through to see if I can find something that I like better. And frankly, some of my large diaphragm condensers do sound better, but when it comes to, but better is relative, right? It's like, oh, there's a bit more bottom on this and whatever, but is it really better for this particular job?
Right.
And I can't find something that seems to work better in that context. It just seems to be the right one for my voice, that's going to be the most consistent, that's going to give me the least amount of problems. So that's why, I continue to use it, even though I have a lot to choose from.
Right? That's great. That shows, wisdom, that you can understand what the job is and that you need you need the best tool or the most appropriate tool for that job. And so you probably have condensers that are, that probably cost like $5,000 or $8,000 or $10,000, and technically, like you said, technically they might sound better, but the SM7B is just the right tool for the job. I like that.
Well, it's the same thing with my signal path as well. I mean, I have the real deal rather than clones, but on the other hand, the clones work well. They sound good, and it's like, well, how much better is it going to sound, and is the average listener out there going to appreciate it? And the answer is probably not much and no.
Right. So you actually have, well, wait, so first I got to ask you this. So do you have your own studio?
No.
Okay.
I did at one time. I don't any longer.
Okay. And, is it one of those things like owning a boat? Like the best day is when you sell it?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, the trend is not to have a studio any longer. There's two reasons to have one anymore. One is if you can't do it at your house for whatever reason, usually because there's too much going on. I don't have kids or anything, so that's not a problem. The other thing is if you, as an engineer and producer, if I was going to track a lot, then I'd probably have my own studio.
Right.
But I don't do as much of that anymore. So, I don't need it. I can go to whatever studio I want when I have a project, and I don't have to worry about the maintenance, and I don't have to worry about, all the minutia of having a studio.
Right.
Except for paying, when I go someplace else. But, it's well worth the money at that point.
Right.
But I have to say, most of my gear does not live with me here. It lives at a friend's studio who does track a lot. And it's basically like, well, rather than having it sit here and not doing anything, you just take it and use it. And if I need it, I'll get it back from you.
Right. Okay. So the 1073 clone you're using, who makes that one?
Oh, that's a Golden Age Audio. It's a pre-73. I don't even remember how I got it or when I got it. I just remember when I was doing this, I started to play around to see what would be the best signal path. And this was here. I don't even know how I got this thing. But it works. It sounds really good. Does it sound like my real 1073? No, but it's not that far away. Honestly, it's in the ballpark. The real one does sound better. I mean, there's no question about it. But for this, considering how it's going to get crushed at the end, no, I don't think that there's that much of a difference in the long run. So that's what I use. I've tried using other things, and I've tried using the mic amps on the Apollo Twin. I just got the Mark II. I used to have a Mark I.
Right.
And although the mic preamps are very good on both of them, just doesn't sound quite as good as this one. And it's mostly on the low end. The low end is beefier. Let's put it like that.
I was just going to ask you about the Universal Audio Apollo Twin Mark II that you have. And because Universal Audio, they actually have, you can use a Neve 1073 mic pre emulation right on that Apollo unit, right?
Yeah, you can. And I got to tell you, it just doesn't work for me somehow. And especially now, let me just say that I'm not a purist by any stretch of the imagination. And when it comes to plugins, I'm fine with them all. I don't, I'm not one of these guys that says, well, it doesn't sound like the real thing, so I'm not going to use it. No,
Right.
It is what it is. I don't care. But for some reason, while recording, I've never liked the sound of any of that. It doesn't sound like it. It colors things. I don't want the color. I want the bandwidth. And I don't get that from it. I just get some sort of color, and it's like, well, I don't really want it colored.
Right.
So that's what it brings. Now, like I was saying, I have a Warm Audio 76, WA76. It's 1176 clone, and these are great. They really are for the money. I have this in the studio. I bought it instead of having a real 1176, especially for this. And I used it for quite a while, and, it's noisy. All of them are, to some degree. You're putting something else in the signal path, so you're going to add noise. I don't think people at the other end could hear or tell, but it bothered me. So I took it out. Now, I do use the 1176 plug-in on the input of the Twin on the their console,
Mm.
and it doesn't respond like an 1176 at all to me. So I don't know. It just doesn't sound like it. Now, the funny thing is, I use it all the time when mixing, and it works great. It works fine. But for some reason on the input, it just doesn't seem to work the way I expect it to. So it bugs me.
Right.
But it is there. So it does smooth things out a little bit.
Interesting. Yeah, when you were talking about how you feel about the Apollo Twin using the 1073 mic preamp emulation, and that just the color of it wasn't right. I feel the same way. I have a Neve channel strip. It's a Neve Portico 2, and I love it. The mic pre's great, but when I put the EQ in, like, because I wanted to EQ my voice to tape, but when I just click, when I engage the EQ without even boosting or cutting anything, all of a sudden the color's different. And I was like, I don't like it. And then I would add some low end or do whatever, and it was like, nah. So I just took the EQ out, and I just used the little bit of compression on that thing because the color, right? Just same reason as you, like, just capture it clean and crisp, and that's better.
Yeah. I mean, I can certainly appreciate color and we as engineers who've done music, that's a big part of what you do. But for this, I don't think it's a requirement at all.
Right.
So now the one thing we didn't talk about is I'm using Audio-Technica ATM50s for headphones, ATM50X. And frankly, I have another pair of Sennheisers, the HD650s or 650 HDs.
Oh, yeah.
And they sound wonderful. The problem is they're open back, so they don't work for most situations like this.
Right.
So I have other ones as well, but it's the ATM50s that I usually use. When it comes to post, I have a pair of Equator D8s, and the D8s are dual concentric, which I've always liked. That being said, within a week or so, I'm going up to a set of Ampheons. And the reason why is I tracked an album the beginning of the year with the set, and they were just fantastic and just sold me on it.
Really?
So I will be going to Ampheons, I think they call it a 218. And they're not powered, surprisingly enough. They require an external power amplifier, and the best one for them is the Ampheon. There's two models. There's a 100-watt channel. There's like a 300-watt channel, and it's a 300-watt channel per channel is what I'm going to be using. Which is kind of odd because we've been so used to having powered monitors for such a long time. But there are limitations with them, and I've heard it enough that, and I've heard the difference now with the Amphenols and the Ampheons. So I think that'll be fun.
So they're the Ampheon 218s?
218s, yeah.
Okay. And what were the monitors you have currently?
Equator D8s.
Okay. Yeah, monitors are, I mean, that's one thing, like, in podcast production that almost nobody who's a podcast editor or works on podcasts has, like, good near field monitors. I actually bought these Neumann KH120As, and I like them. They're real small, and I just wanted real small near fields, right? And but yeah, so yeah. I haven't heard the Ampheons.
It's funny because it's been a long time now. It must have been in the 90s, I guess. I wrote for EQ magazine, and I did all of their speaker reviews. And at one point in time, I got whatever the biggest version of they're K&H at that point, I think, but right. Essentially the Neumanns. And they were fantastic. I loved them. The limitation was you couldn't turn them up. There's a built-in limiter that would really clamp it down and change the sound. Now, I'm not an advocate of listening loudly, but there are occasions when you need it.
Right.
And the big one is, and we don't need it in podcast editing or anything. It's not that important. But when you're doing mixing, especially trying to figure out the low end on the bass and drums, you need it loud for at least a couple minutes.
Right.
And it was really important to at least be able to do that. And I couldn't do it to my satisfaction at that point in time. I don't know if they've changed it since then, but they were really nice monitors. They're very accurate. And at the time I remember doing a mix and thinking, well, that's the best thing I've ever done.
That's cool.
But it's quite a long time now.
Right. So that's your signal chain. And I haven't ever tried the Apollo Twin or any of the Apollo interfaces. I really wanted to, but it's just, I actually recently got a Sound Devices Mix Pre 6, which, which is, I'm loving it because it's an interface, it's a recorder, it's a mixer too, actually. So it's, and the mic pre's are real nice. So,
yeah. Well, I would venture to say the mic pre's are better than they are on the Apollo.
Okay.
That being said, the mic pre's are quite good on the Apollo. They are, but they're not as good as an outboard mic amp. But for most people that are doing podcasting, they'd be over the moon with it.
Right. Yeah, because Apollo, they also make that
Go ahead.
Arrow or something. Apollo Arrow. It's like it's a 2-channel or maybe even 1-channel. It's really small interface.
Yeah, I have no experience with that. I will say that the difference between the Mark II and the Mark I is subtle, but it's there, and it's mostly in the converters on both sides. A to D and a D to A's are better sounding. But most people probably wouldn't hear it. I mean, you would hear it. I hear it, but the average person, I'm not sure they would.
Right. That's the balance for us, right? It's like you want to do the best, but it's not like music where if you spend time and really do it right with music, then it creates a whole another level of quality. But a podcast, it's like splitting hairs.
Yeah, the other thing I should say is cables. I use Wireworks cables, which are fairly expensive. They're boutique. And Wireworld.
Okay.
And Wireworld Pro. And frankly, I always thought cables were, especially the high-end, really expensive ones, were, a lot of snake oil.
Right.
And they proved to me it's not the case. And it was something that was quite audible. And I almost hesitate to say this, power cables, which I have an engineering background, electrical engineering background. So I know how this stuff works. And I just looked at this guy when he was telling me from Wireworld, and I thought, you're going to have to prove it to me, and I'll be darned if they did. The cables, there's heft in the bottom that wasn't there before. And it's basically it's a resonant frequency thing that happens that they actually get rid of. A low-end resonant frequency thing, thanks to the way they put the cables together and all sorts of different things. But there's a good scientific explanation, which I eventually found out, and it does make a difference. Would it be enough? Again, you would hear it, and right. I hear it. Most people, and I would venture to say there are some people that would say right away, yeah, I hear that, and other people would say no.
Right. Totally. Yeah. That's interesting. I recently, well, not recently, when I got the Mix Pre 6, then I got some Mogami cables, which are they're better than like the average, $15 mic cable. But yeah, cable, and it made a difference to me. It was like, wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Just something, just more clarity and just more, almost transparency, but it's not that it was being blurred with maybe it is being blurred slightly with a cheaper cable. I don't know, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Now, I should say there's some other things about my room. Again, this is for the post side of things. I'm in a bedroom, in a rather small bedroom in my house, and I have a couple different types of acoustic treatment. First of all, I have a lot of tube traps, ASC Tubetraps, and these are round cylinders that are absorbers, acoustic absorbers, both as stands for my speakers. And let's see, there's one in every corner at least, and there's about another dozen around. Plus there's a number of acoustic panels off to the side, either side and above me. So it makes what we call an RFZ, a reflection-free zone. And with that idea, you can make any room sound fairly good. It doesn't do anything for the isolation, but it makes the room sound pretty presentable and pretty okay. I've found that I have a big hole at 80 cycles in this room, and I found that doing mixing and going to mastering and going, why isn't my 80 cycles there? What's going on? But I learned how to compensate for that, and as we all do. I'm also in the flight path of the Burbank airport. And depending how the wind blows, planes will fly directly over my house.
Oh, wow.
And even though I've taken lots of steps, small steps to decrease that, it's still enough that on certain days I will have to stop.
Right.
Now I won't, I'll stop during post-production if I'm doing my monologue, so to speak, because you can't hear the plane going over. If I'm doing a podcast, generally not. Or, if I'm doing a podcast interview, generally not, because I can get away without it. But it does bother me, I have to say. And the only thing is, I know I can make it better. I'm just not willing to spend the time and money in order to do it, because unfortunately there's no easy way to gain isolation. It's all brute force, and brute force means money and labor. So, I don't really want to do that.
Right.
So I kind of live with it. It works okay.
It reminds me of the recording of Randy Rhoads on Ozzy's tribute album, where he's playing the acoustic song and he actually stops. He's like, "Oh, there's a jet." Because you can hear a plane going by. I don't know where he was recording it, but you could literally hear a plane in the background.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what happens here. But now today, there's nothing going over. It's just because the wind is blowing the right way.
Oh, that's cool.
Now, again, I'm in Burbank, and we do also get our fair share of police helicopters that go over. And that is absolutely the worst. If you can get away, if you can have a room that eliminates the helicopter noise, you've done a really great job, because most of them can't do that.
That's so funny. Like today, where I live near the Air Force Academy, and there's a couple Air Force bases here in Colorado Springs. And every now and then a plane, like a fighter jet or something, will come, like, it sounds like it's right above our house, like zipping by.
Yeah.
It's so loud and thunderous. It's but that only happens, like, I don't even know, once every 4 to 6 months, but one of them went over today. That's so funny.
We get that here too. I don't know why, but every now and then some fighters will drop by at Burbank, and when they come over, the house shakes. It's unbelievable. It's a different level completely from the normal jetliner.
So I have a question. Go ahead, Bobby.
No, I was just going to say, when the president's in town, and this is any president, the president has an entourage of ospreys.
Oh.
And that's also, and of course they come into Burbank and go out of Burbank, and there's usually 4 of them. And that's another level, again, from helicopters. The normal police helicopters are nothing compared to an osprey, and definitely no recording can go on when that's happening.
Wow. There you go. You should, well, next time they go over, just record some of it. We can.
Yeah, right. I should
show it as a sample.
Yeah.
So Bobby, a lot of people want to get into podcasting. They don't know anything about audio. And I have clients like this because I produce shows for clients, and, they'll be like, "Oh, I want to do a podcast show." And of course I can help them with what mic to buy and what gear to buy, right? And it depends on their situation, right? So what would you say to someone who it doesn't know anything about audio, is going to get into podcasting? What would you tell them to sort of be careful with, or to beware of, or to make, or maybe one or two things that they make sure they get right?
I don't know that I could speak to that from the standpoint that when I started, I was already an advanced recording engineer, just in terms of the knowledge I had compared to somebody that's just starting.
Right.
So I'm not sure what would be well, I guess that my one piece of advice would be to keep it as simple as possible, because you can make it very, very complicated. And the simpler it is, the easier it is to complete a podcast. So that would be my advice. No matter what, keep it simple. But just in terms of gear and stuff like that, I honestly don't know what's available.
Right. Okay.
That.
Yeah, that's fair. You're working on big stuff. You're not doing what I'm doing. So, all right. So let's move into. I want to talk about a bunch of different audio processing, and I'll just bring up. I want to talk about EQ, compression, limiting, de-essing, saturation, and multiband compression. Let's just go through one by one and just give me your, just describe each one to the listener, like the people who don't maybe who don't know what it is and what it can be used for. So let's just start with, and just whatever comes to mind. So let's start with EQ.
Well, equalization, I think people get the wrong idea about it, especially someone that's starting, thinking that what they should be doing is boosting frequencies. And in fact, the better way would be learn to cut frequencies, because it will sound better. And what beginners tend to do is they'll boost a little high end, and then they'll boost a little low end, and they'll boost the mids, and then they'll boost the high end again. Next thing you know, everything is boosted and it's just louder. Where someone like you or I would go in, we think, well, wait, there seems like a whole lot of mid-range there. Maybe we should dip that a little and see what it sounds like. And many times that's what you need. It's a quick and fast way to make things sound better.
Right. So when you're producing your podcast, how much time do you spend, in terms of sort of matching your voice with your guest's voice in terms of EQ? Because sometimes, especially a lot of people on Skype, there won't be much clarity and there'll be a lot of really low end and stuff. So do you actually, and I know you do this, but how do you do this? How do you make sure your voice and the guest's voice sound similar enough to provide a good listening experience?
Honestly, I don't do that. What I do is, again, I have some general curves that I've worked out over the period of doing this, where there are presets in the EQ.
Got it.
And I'll hit those presets depending on the situation, and it gets me in the ballpark, and I have to tweak it. But generally what it will do is it will add some low end that probably wasn't there. It will add some clarity that probably wasn't there, and a little bit of error that probably wasn't there. Obviously, if it wasn't there at all, you can't add it back in, but if it was there a little bit, then you can help it.
Right. And
usually there's too much of upper mids, and I tend to dip that. And the next thing you know, it sounds reasonable. Does it sound great? No, but it sounds reasonable,
right, to
where no one complains about it. And then the next thing I'll do, though, and I'll be very careful about this, is, and I didn't for a long time until it dawned on me, I should approach this as I would a music mix. But I'll be very careful about the levels between my level and the guest level.
Right.
And the way I'll do that is, again, what we do with mixing is we'll mix at one level for most of it, and then at the end, when you're pretty satisfied, is lower the level until it's about at whisper level. So in other words, it's barely on. And at that point, you can really hear any differences, where if someone is louder or softer or whatever.
Right.
And that way I do the final leveling between the guest and myself and any music beds that I have. So again, I didn't do that for a long time. And then and what ended up happening was I got an email from someone saying, boy, this last podcast was so good because the guest's voice was equal to yours. I thought, oh man, are you kidding me? You mean all the other ones were not?
Mm.
And I was like, well, I think I have to approach this the way I usually do.
That's awesome.
That's what I do.
All right. So for compression, I get a lot of questions on compression, and a lot of people sign up to my school to learn EQ and compression a lot, and compression is so important in audio. But it's sometimes it's not hard to explain, but it's sometimes hard for the listener or the questioner to understand what a compressor is. So how would you describe a compressor to someone who knows nothing?
Well, if it's done well, it's taking words and phrases that are quiet and bringing them up, and other ones that are maybe louder than the norm and bringing them down. So it's equalizing the level, so to speak. The level is more the same. And I think the big thing with compression is people either use too much. That tends to be the case, where they'll whack it on there and make things sound worse, or they won't use the parameters that are available. They won't use them correctly. And it does take time to kind of learn how to do this, but what's especially important would be the attack and release time. And I think most people that are just starting with this or don't have much experience with it will tend to use the default settings that may not be right for a particular voice or a voice at all.
Right.
So that's important to learn how to do that. Generally speaking, faster attack and a little slower release tends to work better, but it gets adjusted per guest from me anyway.
Right.
The other thing is the ratio. If the ratio is how much, it's a compression ratio. If it's 4-1, for instance, if 4 dB come into the compressor, only 1 dB comes out. And what I find is people tend to use that too high or set that too high.
Mm.
And there's a time and place for that when you need a lot of control, but usually you don't need as much control. It somewhere around 2-1, 3-1, 4-1 works better, I think.
Right.
And it's gentler, so you can add more compression without actually hearing it. You can get away with adding more compression. You know, it's funny. I just went through this. This is kind of interesting. I think you'll like it. When I first moved to California, I was taking any engineering job I could get. I had a friend that was working in a media house, and he said, I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks. Can you fill in for me? Yeah, no problem. So all they did was voiceovers, and they did it for radio commercials and some television commercials. So that's all I did for 2 weeks. But before he left, he says, okay, this is the way we set things up. And it was a DBX 160 compressor they were using, 160X. And he said, I set it so there's about 6 dB of compression or so. Okay, no problem. I listened to other commercials, and it sounds like it's really whacked on there. And I remember then doing a commercial and being in the studio doing vocals for a jingle, and there are 5 singers, and singers are all around one mic, and the leader says, it just doesn't sound right. Okay, come in here and see. So he comes in the control room, and singers continue to sing. He looks at the compressor, and there's 6 dB of compression or so, and he says, wait, that's the problem. And he goes and he whacks it up until there's 20 dB. And it gave it kind of a radio sound. Huh. So then I was kind of torn. I was in between. It's like, okay, so how much do you use? And ever since then, I tend to be very gentle with it, 2 or 3 dB. And, I go beyond that. I get a little nervous. And it's funny because recently I had a couple of different guests on my podcast that did either ADR for movies or they did voiceovers for television or whatever. And I said, okay, so you tell me, how much do you add? And both of them were very judicious with how much they added. And one guy said, I don't use it at all if I can help it. So it was like, okay, well, I guess I didn't learn the right way way back when. But I think the whole point is you have to be careful. You don't want to use too much because, it can get you in trouble, make things sound worse instead of better. And usually less is more.
Right. Yeah. The rookie mistake is you add way too much. And so that's why in the podcast engineering school, I teach students that go ahead and set it to where you like it. Maybe even, hit it really hard, but then drop it back like literally 50% of the way.
Yep.
And then just leave it there for a little bit and then see how you feel in 5 minutes, about it.
Yep.
So de-essing is something that I wrestle with every day with my clients and producing podcasts. It's just a combination of a person's voice and the mic and everything. And some people's sibilance is just really rough. I have one client, my most successful client in terms of download numbers, a lot of sibilance. I mean, I literally use 3 de-essers. And the reason is because I don't hit each one that hard at all. So it's like I'm juggling 3 de-essers sort of to get the right amount of de-essing to where it still sounds natural. And it's sometimes, some days it's not easy. And I keep going back and forth with myself. Sometimes it's like, am I taking out enough? Cause I don't want to overdo it. Cause if you overdo a de-esser, that's like one of the worst things you can do, right? It just sounds terrible.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a problem. There may be a problem there, especially, but a lot of it has to do with mic placement.
Right.
I'll give you an example. My microphone right now is at a 45-degree angle. It's off to my right at a 45-degree angle aimed at my lips. So as a result, you're not really hearing any plosives. Right. If I get right on it like this and then you do hear the plosives. There are, in the studio, I kind of learned from some classic engineers, guys that were doing it way, way, way back when in the beginning. And one of the things that I learned early on was mic placement. If you look at any of the old pictures of Frank Sinatra or Dean Martin or any of those, you'll usually see a microphone that's above them, kind of like at nose or eye level, and is, again, at like a 45-degree angle and pointed at their lips. So as a result, they're kind of singing below it. So there's no plosives, and also as a result, the sibilance is lessened quite a bit. So that has a lot to do with it. I think one of the problems, again, you'll get is people will be right on the mic and they'll be eating the mic like this. And yeah, there's a certain sound to it, but boy, there's a lot of that there. I don't know. It's not particularly natural. I don't think it sounds great, and it adds more problems than it really helps. Right. That being said, when it comes to de-essing, I do have those problems myself. It's more with the guest than with me. With the guest, a combination of Skype, a combination of the compression. You're always going to add some of that with compression. So I searched high and low for the right de-essers. The one I haven't tried that everybody is talking about is called Soothe by Oak Sound.
Oh, I just tried that. I liked it. It was pretty good. I got the trial version and I just tried it. But I sort of was expecting like magic, and of course my expectation was a little too high because, it's nothing is magic. But I liked it. It was pretty good. It's pretty good.
I heard you have to play with it until you get it kind of dialed in, but that's a dynamic de-esser, so to speak. But I don't see how different that really is from. I think I told you in the beginning. I use Waves F6 dynamic EQ.
Right.
Basically the same thing. And what it's doing is I think there's 6 bands to it. So if I want 6 really tight bands, I can get them. Although I don't think I've ever gone beyond 4, and most of the time it's 3 that I use. And it does do the job. So I'm quite happy with that. But it took a really long time to find it, or at least to find the technique that kind of worked for me.
Right. Yeah, the thing with the Soothe plugin, it's supposedly it moves the frequency bands around dependent on the program material.
Right.
So it's not like you set 5800 kilohertz or 5800 hertz. That's the center of my de-esser. It's like, no, for Soothe, you just give it like a sort of a bandwidth, let's say between 3K and up, and it'll detect the audio and de-ess it where it needs it, kind of thing. So it's worked pretty good. My go-to is the Fabfilter Pro DS. That one, to me, that one sounds great.
I haven't used that, but frankly, everything the Fabfilter makes is dynamite.
Oh, just the Pro MB, the multi-band compressor. Oh my God,
yeah.
That's like the best thing ever.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow.
I'm so impressed with those guys. It just sounds so natural, but if you want to, you can make it colored as well. Especially the latest versions, the version 2 of everything seems to have a lot more variation. Although, again, it can be too much sometimes because you can find yourself playing a lot and not getting anywhere. And it can, on the other hand, it can be very confusing. There's somebody who isn't aware of what those parameters are and why they're there.
Yes. Yeah, that's why, a lot of podcast engineers and podcast producers and editors, really, most of them they're just not just editors, but they do a lot of editing. They also process some audio, but they do editing. A lot of them use Adobe Audition as their DAW, and apparently Adobe Audition has some pretty good built-in like effects or plugins. And so, and there's what do you call them? Presets, right? So there's one, I know there's a multi-band compressor in Adobe Audition, which I don't use. There's a multi-band compressor, and there's a preset called, I don't even know what it's called. Maybe it's called Radio or something. And like that's what people use. They just put that on it, and that's it. They're done. So
wow,
makes it easy, I guess. But it's not always going to be 100% correct what it does to the audio, but close enough.
Now, I use Pro Tools. It's not my particular digital audio workstation of choice, but it's the one that's easiest, especially now. I originally was at version 1 of Digital Performer right in the beginning, and then moved to Nuendo version 1.
Wow.
When the audio on Digital Performer wasn't quite up to snuff at the time. And I loved Nuendo. The problem was the rest of the world that I deal with was on Pro Tools. So I'd get a session in, I'd have to move it to Nuendo and then move it back again. And it was taking too much time, and there's the inevitable problems in the moving.
Right.
So I finally bit the bullet and went to Pro Tools, and that's what I've been using ever since, even though I do have Logic and I have Harrison Mix Bus and probably a couple other things, but I rarely use them.
Mm.
So, and the other thing I do is I do a fair amount of video editing for my courses. So I'm in Final Cut all the time.
Oh.
And Final Cut, I usually don't process the audio first in Pro Tools. I process it, do whatever editing or anything I have to within Final Cut. And the good thing is now you can access most of the same plugins, although they look different and they seem to act a little bit differently, but it's very similar just in terms of what's available to you.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. So this has been awesome. I can't believe the time has just flown by, Bobby. So thank you so much for coming on the Podcast Engineering Show, man.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Good talk.
Yeah, good. I mean, it feels like we could talk for like 9 days straight. Everyone should go to your website, bobbyowsinski.com. It'll be in the show notes, of course, and along with a lot of other details, including a lot of what you talked about as well. Do you want to have people check you out anywhere specific, Bobby?
Well, you might want to check out my blogs. Although if you go to bobbyowsinski.com, there are links there you'll see right away. I have 2 blogs that I write every weekday. One's a music production blog. That's bobbyowsinskiblog.com. Pretty easy. And the other one is a music industry blog. It's just music business primarily and social media and how that plays into it. So it's music3.0.com, named after one of my books. And
Cool.
then I also write for Forbes on big picture music business stuff, and that's every couple of weeks there's something comes out there. And of course, my podcast, it's BobbyOInnerCircle.com.
Cool. All right. We'll have those links in the show notes. And real quick on the music business, like I haven't really paid attention to popular music for many years, but it just seems like everything is so bland these days. Like pop music is just like, some rap and some like, do you think there's anything interesting going on in pop music right now?
Well, I think if I compare it to decades past, it's similar in that what we tend to hear is, what's on the most popular playlist or what's on the most popular playlist of a radio station, for instance. And you're hearing a very limited part of what's available.
Right.
Especially right now, I just read something today. I was actually in Billboard where they looked at the top hits of the year, and it was all hip hop for the most part. There was like 70% hip hop.
Right.
And again, if you look at Spotify, their top playlist, that's what you see as well. But it turns out that in terms of streams, hip hop is not top. Or if it is, it's not by much. And there are other genres that are actually doing quite well. So we can be quite fooled by all this, by what seems to be popular, and in actuality is popular in only one small portion of the universe. And, I should say, it was interesting. I was just in Asia. I came back yesterday. I was in Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, Tokyo, and Penang, Malaysia. And what was interesting was there was hardly any American music anywhere, which is different from the way it used to be. The hits of the day used to be worldwide. It didn't. You walk down the street in Paris and you would hear whatever you're hearing, in Philadelphia back here, or wherever. The big hits would be the big hits everywhere, and it's not the case anymore. So I don't know whether to attribute that to the quality of the music or just the fact that the localities are getting more interesting with their own music. I hope it's that.
Right. Yeah, I just listened to the Broken Record podcast, and they did an episode on some Nashville songwriters, and back in like the late 70s, early 80s, these guys were writing, the classic songs like The Gambler and all these other songs. And it's like, I don't know, just like songwriting to me is so fascinating. And I don't know, in pop music, I mean, are there any songs in pop music these days that are actually like really well written, kind of like sort of like works of art? And I mean, I don't hear it, but I don't have my finger on the pulse of it. So,
well, Ed Sheeran is pretty good. And I especially like the fact that he's a real player. He can go out by himself and do it. And the loops that he uses, he creates, which is kind of different than everybody else. But that being said, I think one of the problems is the fact that now there's songwriters camps. I don't know if you're aware of this, but
I heard about this.
Yeah, where it's no longer just a songwriter or a songwriter partnership where there's 2 or 3 people. It's a dozen people on a song, and it gets written to death, so to speak. It gets very homogenized as a result. So I think that's a big, and it's so much so that the record labels are actually sponsoring this anymore, where there are recording studios that are now built for this, where they'll have 12 small rooms instead of one big studio. And 12 small rooms for the writing groups to get together, and then they'll have a bigger studio somewhere where they'll go and they'll finish it off. A very different way of doing things.
Yeah, very different. I mean, it's almost exactly opposite of like, you think of stories like Paul McCartney, he heard the melody. He just heard the melody for Hey Jude in his mind and started thinking about it. And he's like, I know that song from somewhere. But, like the inspiration a songwriter gets, and then just a song comes out that is an ultra classic. Like, that's exactly opposite to these songwriting cams, right?
Yeah, right. That's for sure.
But anyway, Bobby Owsinski, your podcast is called Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle Podcast. So go check out Bobby's podcast.
It's BobbyOInnerCircle.com.
Right, Bobby O.
Okay,
Inner Circle.
that's the URL. BobbyOInnerCircle.com. It's Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle is the name of the podcast.
Yeah, and that'll be there. So, all right, Bobby. So the way we end the show is we're each going to yell right as the music kicks in. We're going to yell "Sound great!" All right. So thanks to Bobby Owsinski, dude. Seriously, this was a really great chat. I really appreciate you coming on the show, man.
I enjoyed it, Chris.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, we'll see you next episode, everybody. Until then, all right. Pretty soon. 1 second. All right. Let's go. Sound great. Yes.
Walk away.